The popular image of a pirate is a carefully manufactured lie. Colorful flags, buried treasure, parrots on shoulders, and cheerful lawlessness belong more to fiction than to history. Real pirates lived harsh, dangerous, and often miserable lives. Their existence was shaped not by romance, but by poverty, violence, disease, and constant fear of death. To understand piracy honestly, one must strip away mythology and examine the social and economic forces that created pirates in the first place. Piracy did not emerge from a love of freedom. It emerged from exploitation. During the late 17th and early 18th centuries, maritime labor was among the most brutal professions in the world. Sailors aboard merchant and naval vessels endured starvation rations, spoiled water, unpaid wages, and relentless physical punishment. Captains ruled like tyrants, backed by maritime law that allowed flogging, confinement, and execution for even minor offenses. Sailors had almost no legal protection. Once at sea, they were effectively property. Even worse was the practice of impressment. Naval press gangs roamed port cities, kidnapping able-bodied men and forcing them into service for years. Many pirates began their lives as unwilling sailors, stolen from their homes and beaten into obedience. Under such conditions, piracy appeared not as moral collapse, but as escape.
Pirate crews were often formed from mutinies. A merchant ship suffering abuse would reach a breaking point. A charismatic or ruthless sailor would rally others, overthrow the captain, and redirect the ship toward piracy. This origin shaped pirate culture. Pirates despised traditional authority, but they understood discipline was necessary for survival. As a result, pirate ships developed a strange hybrid of brutality and democracy. Every pirate ship operated under written articles agreed upon by the entire crew. These articles regulated behavior, distribution of loot, compensation for injuries, and punishment for crimes. Theft from fellow pirates, fighting aboard ship, or desertion were harshly punished. Pirates were criminals, but they were not anarchists. Order mattered. The captain, contrary to myth, was not an absolute ruler. He was elected and could be removed. His authority was strongest in battle, when quick decisions meant life or death. Outside combat, power was balanced by the quartermaster, who represented the crew's interests. This system existed because pirates feared tyranny more than chaos. Life aboard a pirate ship was physically exhausting. Ships were overcrowded. Sleep was irregular and uncomfortable. Exposure to sun, salt, and storms destroyed bodies quickly. Pirates aged fast. A man of 30 might already be considered old. Injuries were common, and medical care was primitive. Surgeons, when present, relied on saws, knives, and alcohol. Infection killed more pirates than combat.
Food was monotonous and often revolting. Hardtack biscuits were infested with insects. Salted meat rotted. Fresh food was rare and highly valued. Water spoiled quickly, forcing pirates to drink alcohol instead. Scurvy, caused by vitamin deficiency led to rotting gums, weakness, and death. Many pirates died slowly, far from any battle. Violence was constant but calculated. Pirates preferred intimidation over combat. Their flags were psychological weapons. Symbols of skulls, bones, and bleeding hearts sent a clear message: surrender and live, or resist and die. Most merchant crews chose surrender. Pirates were criminals, not fools. Damaged ships and dead sailors reduced profit. When violence occurred, it was savage. Close-range fighting involved pistols, cutlasses, axes, and grenades. Battles were chaotic and short. Mercy was selective. Captains who resisted were often executed as examples. Terror was a business strategy. Despite this brutality, pirate crews could be surprisingly diverse. Europeans, Africans, indigenous sailors, and former slaves worked together. Skill mattered more than origin. On many ships, racial hierarchies were weaker than on land. This did not make pirates moral reformers. Many trafficked in slaves. But within the floating world of piracy, rigid imperial categories blurred.
Money was another myth. Most pirates never saw gold. Their loot consisted of trade goods, sugar, tobacco, textiles, spices. These were sold quickly in pirate ports. Money was spent immediately. Gambling, alcohol, and prostitutes consumed fortunes in days. Pirates lived fast because they knew life would be short. Few pirates imagined old age. Most expected to die violently. Disease, execution, or battle awaited them. Pirate careers rarely lasted more than a few years. The sea did not forgive mistakes. Yet men still chose piracy, not because it was easy, but because the alternatives were worse. In a world of empires built on suffering, piracy was not rebellion against order. It was a symptom of it. To truly understand pirate life, one must examine the psychological transformation that occurred when a sailor crossed the line into piracy. Becoming a pirate was not simply changing professions. It was stepping outside the law, society, and any expectation of mercy. From that moment forward, a pirate lived with the knowledge that capture almost certainly meant death. This awareness shaped pirate behavior. Pirates were often portrayed by contemporaries as reckless and immoral, but in reality, they were acutely aware of risk. Their apparent recklessness was often a calculated response to a short and uncertain future. Long-term planning made little sense when survival itself was temporary. Fear was a constant companion. Not fear of battle. Most pirates were experienced sailors, accustomed to violence, but fear of betrayal, disease, and pursuit. Naval patrols intensified throughout the early 18th century as empires recognized piracy as a threat to global trade. Pirate hunters, often former pirates themselves, knew how pirates thought and operated. Capture became more likely with each passing year. As a result, pirate ships rarely stayed in one region for long. They moved constantly, following trade routes across the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean.
This nomadic existence was exhausting. Months at sea strained both body and mind. Tensions flared easily. Alcohol dulled fear, but worsened discipline. Many pirate articles banned excessive drinking during combat for this reason. Despite their reputation, pirates valued fairness among themselves. Loot was divided according to predetermined shares. A captain might receive 2 shares, skilled officers 1.5, and ordinary crew 1 share. This system reduced internal conflict. More importantly, it ensured cooperation during dangerous operations. Greed without structure destroyed crews quickly. Pirates also practiced early forms of insurance. Articles often specified compensation for injury. Losing a right arm might earn a significant payout. Losing an eye, a leg, or fingers resulted in lesser amounts. This was not compassion, it was practicality. Injured pirates could no longer fight or work efficiently. Compensation prevented resentment and mutiny. However, discipline was unforgiving. Theft from the crew was among the worst crimes. Pirates who stole from their comrades violated the fragile trust holding the ship together. Punishments ranged from whipping to marooning. Marooning was especially feared. The condemned was abandoned on an island with a small amount of food, a bottle of water, and sometimes a pistol. Death was almost certain, slow and lonely. Pirate justice was public and collective. Trials were informal but serious. Accused pirates were confronted before the crew. Evidence, witness testimony, and reputation mattered. Decisions were made by vote or by officers. This system reinforced unity. Everyone understood the rules, and everyone knew the consequences. Contrary to legend, pirates did not constantly sing or celebrate. Long stretches of boredom defined life at sea. Days passed with nothing but maintenance, navigation, and watch duty. Sailors repaired sails, cleaned weapons, and hunted rats. Mental strain accumulated. Stories, music, and gambling helped pass time, but depression and paranoia were common.
Navigation itself was dangerous. Pirates relied on stolen charts, experience, and crude instruments. Storms could destroy ships in hours. Hurricanes were especially deadly in the Caribbean. Many pirates died without ever seeing an enemy ship, swallowed by the sea without record or grave. Ports offered temporary relief. Pirate havens such as Nassau became chaotic centers of vice and commerce. Stolen goods flooded markets. Corrupt officials accepted bribes. Taverns thrived. Violence between rival crews was frequent. These places were not utopias of freedom. They were unstable, dangerous, and short-lived. Relationships in pirate ports were transactional. Few pirates maintained families. Marriage was rare and impractical. Some pirates formed long-term partnerships with women or men, but these relationships were fragile. Long absences, death, and betrayal were constant threats. Emotional attachment was a liability. Sexually transmitted diseases were widespread. Combined with poor hygiene and medical ignorance, they contributed to the short lifespan of pirates. Medical treatment in ports was often worse than aboard ships. Quacks and alcohol replaced proper care.
Religion played a complex role. Some pirates rejected organized religion entirely, viewing it as another tool of authority. Others were deeply superstitious. Omens, dreams, and rituals influenced decisions. Fear of the unknown sea coexisted with contempt for earthly law. Many pirates prayed before battle, despite living in open defiance of religious doctrine. Death was omnipresent. Pirates witnessed friends die violently or slowly decay from illness. Burial at sea was common. Bodies wrapped in cloth slid into the water without ceremony. Sharks often followed ships, a grim reminder of fate. This constant exposure to death hardened pirates emotionally. Compassion existed, but it was limited. Survival demanded emotional distance. Those who could not adapt either left piracy quickly or died. Yet for all its cruelty, piracy provided something rare in the early modern world: agency. Pirates chose their leaders. They shared profit. They resisted absolute authority. These elements explain why piracy attracted men despite its dangers. It was not freedom in a modern sense, but it was autonomy in a world designed to crush it. This autonomy, however, was fragile. As governments increased pressure, piracy became increasingly unsustainable. The very traits that allowed pirates to survive, violence, mobility, fear, eventually turned against them. By the early 18th century, the end of large-scale piracy was approaching, and the noose was tightening. As piracy expanded across the seas, imperial powers began to respond with increasing severity. What had once been tolerated as a nuisance or even quietly encouraged during wartime became an unacceptable threat to global commerce. The transition from tolerated private violence to hunted criminality marked a turning point in pirate life. From this moment forward, survival required not only brutality, but intelligence, secrecy, and constant movement. Many pirates began their careers as privateers. Privateering was state-sanctioned piracy, legalized through letters of marque issued during wars. Privateers attacked enemy shipping and shared profits with the crown. When wars ended, thousands of armed sailors suddenly found themselves unemployed, experienced in violence, and unwilling to return to miserable merchant service. Piracy was a natural continuation. Governments that had created these men now condemned them. This hypocrisy was not lost on pirates. Many viewed themselves not as criminals, but as betrayed laborers. This belief fueled resentment and justified, in their minds, attacks on all national shipping. Flags changed, allegiances disappeared, and the sea became stateless. To avoid capture, pirates relied heavily on information networks. Ports were full of spies, informants, and corrupt officials. News of naval patrols, convoys, and trade routes spread quickly. Pirate captains cultivated relationships with merchants, tavern owners, and smugglers. Information was as valuable as gunpowder. Pirate ships were modified for speed. Heavy cargo was discarded. Extra sails were added. Hulls were cleaned frequently to reduce drag. Speed meant escape.
A fast ship could choose when to fight and when to flee. Many pirate victories came not from strength, but from positioning and surprise. Camouflage was another tactic. Pirates often sailed under false flags until the last moment. By the time a merchant crew realized the danger, it was too late to escape. Deception reduced resistance and preserved ships and lives.
Despite these strategies, capture was inevitable for many. When pirates were taken alive, their fate was grim. They were transported in chains, often starving and ill, to major ports for trial. Trials were swift and symbolic. Evidence was rarely needed. Reputation alone could condemn a man. Executions were designed to terrify. Hanging was the most common method. In some regions, pirates were executed at low tide, left hanging until the tide rose and drowned them slowly. Bodies were sometimes displayed in iron cages along rivers and harbors. These gruesome displays served as warnings to others who might consider piracy. The psychological impact of this terror campaign was significant. Some pirates accepted royal pardons when offered. Governments periodically attempted to reduce piracy through amnesty, promising forgiveness in exchange for surrender. These pardons were often mistrusted. Many pirates suspected traps, and sometimes they were correct. Others accepted pardons only to return to piracy later, when legal livelihoods proved impossible. Not all pirates were equal in reputation or skill. Some captains became infamous not because they were especially violent, but because they were effective. Reputation itself became a weapon. A well-known pirate name could cause ships to surrender without resistance. Fear saved time and resources.
However, fame also attracted attention. The more successful a pirate became, the more likely governments were to target them. Large rewards were offered for capture. Former allies betrayed each other for money or safety. Pirate communities fractured under pressure. Internal conflict increased as resources diminished. Crews fought over loot, leadership, and direction. Alcohol worsened disputes. Mutinies became common. Pirates who had once fled tyranny sometimes recreated it within their own ranks. Life expectancy declined. Disease spread rapidly in overcrowded ships. Without access to safe ports, pirates lacked fresh supplies. Scurvy returned. Wounds festered. Mental health deteriorated. Isolation, fear, and constant pursuit eroded morale. Some pirates attempted to settle down, forming semi-permanent communities on remote islands or coasts. These settlements were fragile. They depended on stolen goods, smuggling, and secrecy. When discovered, they were destroyed swiftly and brutally. Women and children in these communities suffered greatly. Pirate life offered no stability. Violence was common. Disease and starvation were frequent. These settlements were not rebellions against empire. They were temporary refuges, doomed by their own illegality. The sea itself remained indifferent. Storms continued to sink ships without warning. Navigation errors stranded crews on reefs or hostile shores. Pirates who survived battles often died from accidents or natural forces. The ocean claimed far more lives than any navy. Despite everything, piracy did not disappear overnight. It faded unevenly. Some regions became too dangerous, others remained lawless longer. The Indian Ocean, for example, saw piracy persist after it declined in the Caribbean. Global trade routes created new opportunities even as old ones closed. What ultimately destroyed large-scale piracy was not moral reform, but efficiency. Empires improved coordination, communication, and naval technology. Piracy became economically unviable. Risk outweighed reward. The sea grew smaller under surveillance.
For the individual pirate, the end was rarely dramatic. Most did not die in famous battles. They faded into obscurity, executed quietly, buried anonymously, or lost at sea. Their stories survived only when exaggerated by others. The myth of the pirate grew as the reality died. Writers, artists, and later filmmakers transformed criminals into symbols. Freedom replaced desperation. Adventure replaced hunger. This transformation says more about later societies than about pirates themselves. In truth, the life of a pirate was not a rejection of civilization. It was a consequence of it. While governments worked to eliminate piracy, pirate culture itself continued to evolve. Isolation, constant danger, and shared experience created a distinct worldview among pirates. This worldview was neither noble nor entirely nihilistic. It was pragmatic, shaped by survival rather than ideology. Pirates were not philosophers, but they developed clear attitudes toward loyalty, authority, violence, and fate.
Loyalty among pirates was conditional. It was earned through competence and fairness, not birth or rank. A captain who endangered his crew unnecessarily or cheated them out of shares risked removal or death. This conditional loyalty explains both the stability and fragility of pirate crews. When leadership worked, crews functioned efficiently. When it failed, collapse was swift and often violent. Authority existed, but it was temporary and situational. Pirates understood that rigid hierarchy led to abuse, yet they also recognized that collective decision-making failed in moments of crisis. This contradiction shaped pirate command structures. During battle, obedience was absolute. Outside of it, authority was negotiated. This system reduced resentment but increased tension. Violence within crews was tightly regulated. Fighting aboard ship was dangerous. Blood on deck could mean infection, distraction, or damage. Many pirate articles forbade fighting except on shore. Disputes were often settled through duels on land or by arbitration. This regulation of violence was not moral, it was logistical. Psychologically, pirates lived in a constant state of heightened alertness. Sleep was fragmented. Night watches were tense. Fear of surprise attacks, storms, or internal betrayal prevented rest. Chronic stress affected judgment. Many pirates turned to alcohol not only for pleasure, but for escape. Loyalty among pirates was conditional. It was earned through competence and fairness, not birth or rank. A captain who endangered his crew unnecessarily or cheated them out of shares risked removal or death. This conditional loyalty explains both the stability and fragility of pirate crews. When leadership worked, crews functioned efficiently. When it failed, collapse was swift and often violent. Authority existed, but it was temporary and situational. Pirates understood that rigid hierarchy led to abuse, yet they also recognized that collective decision-making failed in moments of crisis. This contradiction shaped pirate command structures. During battle, obedience was absolute. Outside of it, authority was negotiated. This system reduced resentment but increased tension. Violence within crews was tightly regulated. Fighting aboard ship was dangerous. Blood on deck could mean infection, distraction, or damage. Many pirate articles forbade fighting except on shore. Disputes were often settled through duels on land or by arbitration. This regulation of violence was not moral, it was logistical. Psychologically, pirates lived in a constant state of heightened alertness. Sleep was fragmented. Night watches were tense. Fear of surprise attacks, storms, or internal betrayal prevented rest. Chronic stress affected judgment. Many pirates turned to alcohol not only for pleasure, but for escape. Alcohol consumption among pirates was extreme. Rum, brandy, and wine were staples. Drunkenness increased aggression and risk-taking. Some pirate codes attempted to limit drinking, but enforcement was inconsistent. Addiction weakened crews over time. Accidents, falls, and negligent discharges of weapons became common. Mental illness was rarely acknowledged, but it existed. Depression, paranoia, and trauma were widespread. Pirates witnessed horrific deaths and inflicted violence repeatedly. Without support systems, many deteriorated emotionally. Superstition often replaced rational coping mechanisms. Omens, charms, and rituals provided a sense of control in a chaotic world. Pirate clothing, often depicted as flamboyant, was usually practical. Stolen garments varied widely. Bright colors were common not for style, but because they were abundant in trade goods. Clothing served as protection from sun and salt. Jewelry, when worn, was a form of portable wealth, easily exchanged or hidden. Weapons were central to pirate identity. A pirate was often armed with multiple pistols, a cutlass, and knives. Firearms were unreliable, slow to reload, and inaccurate. Multiple pistols compensated for this limitation. Close combat favored blades. Skill mattered more than technology. Training was informal but continuous. New recruits learned by observation and necessity. Mistakes were fatal. There were no second chances. Combat experience hardened pirates quickly. Veterans became efficient, ruthless fighters. Mercy was situational and often strategic. Relations with captured crews varied. Pirates preferred surrender, but once resistance occurred, punishment was severe. Torture, while not universal, was used to extract information about hidden cargo. Brutality served both practical and psychological purposes. A reputation for cruelty reduced future resistance. However, indiscriminate violence could backfire. Crews that gained reputations for excessive cruelty were hunted more aggressively. Some pirate captains deliberately cultivated images of restraint to encourage surrender. Reputation management. As the external pressure on piracy intensified, the internal contradictions of pirate life became more visible. What had once functioned as a practical alternative to imperial maritime labor began to fracture under stress. Piracy was never a stable system, and as opportunities narrowed, its weaknesses were exposed with brutal clarity. One of the most significant problems was sustainability. Pirate crews depended entirely on constant success. A failed raid meant hunger. A damaged ship meant vulnerability. An injured crew meant reduced combat effectiveness. There were no reserves, no safety nets, and no legal protection. Each voyage was a gamble, and the odds worsened every year. Leadership became increasingly contentious. Captains were expected to deliver success while avoiding capture. When luck failed, blame followed. Crews that once valued democratic decision-making became impatient and volatile. Votes to remove captains became more frequent. In some cases, removed captains were marooned or killed. Authority eroded as desperation grew. Trust also declined. Informants became more common. Governments exploited pirate paranoia by offering pardons and rewards. Some pirates betrayed their own crews in exchange for safety. This betrayal poisoned relationships. Crews became smaller and more suspicious. Cooperation suffered. Economic pressure reshaped pirate behavior. Earlier pirates often avoided unnecessary cruelty to protect reputation. Later pirates, facing fewer targets and harsher pursuit, became more violent and unpredictable. Desperation replaced strategy. This escalation accelerated their downfall by provoking stronger retaliation. The geography of piracy shifted. The Caribbean, once rich with opportunities, became heavily patrolled. Pirates moved toward the African coast, the Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia. These regions offered new trade routes, but introduced unfamiliar conditions. Long distances, different weather patterns, and hostile coastal powers increased risk. Cultural misunderstandings also caused conflict. Pirates operating in non-European regions often underestimated local resistance. Coastal communities fought back fiercely. Some pirates were captured and executed by local rulers, sometimes in ways far more brutal than European punishments. The myth of pirate dominance collapsed quickly outside familiar waters. Health conditions worsened on longer voyages. Extended time at sea without fresh supplies led to increased mortality. Scurvy, dehydration, and malnutrition returned as primary killers. Medical knowledge did not improve. Superstition often replaced treatment. Amputations increased survival in some cases, but crippled crews long term. Psychological strain intensified. Pirates lived under constant threat without the brief relief offered by successful raids and safe ports. Anxiety, irritability, and aggression increased. Alcohol consumption rose further. Discipline declined. Accidents became more frequent. Ships were lost not to enemies, but to negligence. Some pirates attempted to legitimize themselves through settlement or negotiation. They sought land grants, marriages, or integration into colonial economies. These efforts rarely succeeded. Governments distrusted former pirates. Communities feared them. Legal employment paid poorly and offered little dignity. Many returned to piracy, unable to adapt. Others turned to smuggling, which offered lower risk but reduced profit. Smugglers relied on secrecy and corruption rather than violence. This transition required different skills and temperaments. Not all pirates could adjust. Those who failed often fell into poverty or crime on land. Executions continued to shape pirate psychology. Public hangings served as warnings not only to sailors, but to societies tempted by outlaw myths. The spectacle of death was deliberate. Authorities wanted fear to spread faster than stories of adventure. Yet executions sometimes produced the opposite effect. Dying pirates were turned into legends. Ballads exaggerated their courage. Their last words were romanticized. These stories erased suffering and focused on defiance. The reality of disease, betrayal, and despair was ignored. Pirate identity began to outlive piracy itself. Writers and artists transformed criminals into characters. Simplified narratives replaced complexity. The pirate became a symbol rather than a person. This transformation accelerated as piracy declined. It was easier to admire pirates once they were no longer a threat. Historical records are uneven. Most pirate voices survive only through court documents, hostile accounts, and propaganda. Personal diaries are rare. As a result, modern understanding relies heavily on reconstruction. This absence contributes to myth-making. Silence invites invention. However, enough evidence exists to dismantle the fantasy. Pirate life was not egalitarian in practice. Power imbalances persisted. Violence was normalized. Women and non-combatants suffered disproportionately. The illusion of freedom concealed constant coercion. Piracy also failed as resistance. It did not challenge empire structurally. It disrupted trade temporarily, but reinforced militarization. Empires adapted, expanded navies, and tightened control. Pirates inadvertently strengthened the systems they opposed. The decline of piracy was uneven but inevitable. As global trade became more centralized and regulated, opportunities for independent violence shrank. The sea became a controlled space. Surveillance increased. Mobility decreased. For individual pirates, the end came quietly. Few died in glorious battles. Many were arrested without resistance, exhausted and ill. Others disappeared from records entirely. They melted into poverty, anonymity, or early graves. The romantic pirate is a creation of hindsight. Distance softens brutality. Time removes consequences. What remains is costume and attitude, stripped of hunger and fear. Understanding pirate life honestly requires rejecting nostalgia. Pirates were not heroes of freedom. They were workers pushed beyond legal boundaries by exploitation and desperation. Their choices were constrained, their victories temporary, and their losses permanent. In the end, piracy was not an alternative future. It was a dead end. As piracy entered its final phase, the gap between myth and lived experience widened dramatically. The remaining pirates were no longer operating in a world of opportunity, but in one of decline. What survived was not a vibrant subculture, but fragments of a collapsing system. Understanding this phase is essential because it reveals how piracy actually ended, not with dramatic last stands, but with exhaustion, fragmentation, and irrelevance. Late-stage piracy was defined by scarcity. Fewer merchant ships traveled unprotected. Convoys became standard. Naval escorts grew larger and more disciplined. Insurance systems adapted to losses, reducing economic shock. Piracy no longer disrupted trade in meaningful ways. It became a localized nuisance rather than a global threat. This shift altered pirate tactics. Large crews became liabilities. Smaller groups attempted quick strikes close to shore. These attacks were riskier and yielded less profit. Crews could no longer afford long cruises or failed operations. Hunger became common. Desperation replaced calculation. The social fabric of pirate crews deteriorated further. Earlier ideals of shared risk and reward lost credibility when rewards disappeared. Arguments over dwindling loot intensified. Discipline weakened. Violence between crew members increased. In some cases, ships dissolved entirely as members deserted or turned on each other. Psychological fatigue became overwhelming. Years of stress, violence, and uncertainty took their toll. Pirates suffered from what would now be recognized as trauma. Nightmares, emotional numbness, sudden aggression, and withdrawal were common. Without language or support for these conditions, pirates self-medicated with alcohol or violence. The sea itself remained unforgiving. Aging ships required constant maintenance. Without access to proper docks, repairs were improvised and dangerous. Leaks, broken masts, and rigging failures increased. Ships that once symbolized mobility became floating hazards. Environmental factors also played a role. Storm patterns, seasonal winds, and unfamiliar currents posed constant threats. Late-stage pirates operating in new regions often lacked local knowledge. Navigational errors multiplied. Groundings and wrecks claimed entire crews without leaving historical trace. Interactions with coastal populations grew more hostile. Early pirates sometimes relied on local communities for supplies and information. As piracy's reputation worsened, cooperation declined. Villages resisted, armed themselves, or alerted authorities. Pirates became isolated. hunted by both sea and land. Some pirates attempted to reinvent themselves ideologically, framing their actions as resistance to empire or inequality. These narratives were rarely sincere. They served more as psychological justification than political program. Piracy lacked organization, coordination, and vision. It could not sustain collective resistance. Efforts to create stable pirate societies failed repeatedly. Attempts at governance collapsed under internal conflict. Leadership disputes escalated into violence. Scarcity amplified existing tensions. Without external legitimacy or internal cohesion, these experiments disintegrated. Former pirate havens transformed rapidly once governments reasserted control. Nassau, once chaotic and pirate-dominated, was brought under colonial administration. Executions, deportations, and military presence followed. Pirate infrastructure vanished almost overnight. Taverns closed or changed clientele. Smuggling networks adapted or dissolved.
The symbolic power of piracy lingered even as its reality faded. For authorities, pirates remained useful villains. Their image justified expanded naval budgets and harsher maritime laws. Fear of piracy outlived piracy itself. For the public, pirates became characters rather than threats. Plays, pamphlets, and stories exaggerated their defiance and minimized their suffering. The transformation from criminal to legend was already underway. This shift occurred precisely because pirates could no longer contradict it with their actions. Captured pirates in this period often appeared physically and mentally broken. Court records describe men emaciated, ill, and exhausted. Their confessions lacked bravado. Many expressed regret, not for moral reasons, but from sheer weariness. Piracy had consumed them without reward. Executions continued, but their impact diminished. Repetition dulled fear. Public spectacles became routine. Sympathy sometimes replaced terror, especially when the condemned appeared pitiful rather than monstrous. This unintended effect further pushed piracy into the realm of narrative rather than reality. Some pirates survived by erasing their past. They changed names, moved inland, and took menial labor. These transitions were difficult. Former pirates carried reputations and habits ill-suited to stable life. Violence, addiction, and distrust followed them ashore. Others were absorbed into colonial expansion as laborers, soldiers, or informants. Their maritime skills remained valuable. Empires that once hunted pirates quietly exploited their knowledge. This absorption marked piracy's final defeat, its transformation into utility.
By the mid-18th century, piracy no longer functioned as a coherent phenomenon. Isolated acts continued, but they lacked continuity or identity. The pirate was no longer a social role, but an individual criminal. What survived was memory, filtered, simplified, and distorted. The hardships that defined pirate life were inconvenient for storytelling. Hunger, disease, betrayal, and despair did not sell. Adventure did. This selective memory reshaped piracy into something it never was. Freedom replaced compulsion. Brotherhood replaced coercion. Choice replaced necessity. The truth became inaccessible beneath layers of invention. Yet examining piracy honestly reveals more than criminal history. It exposes the brutality of early modern labor systems, the fragility of maritime life, and the consequences of unchecked exploitation. Pirates were not anomalies, they were products. Their disappearance did not mark moral progress, but administrative success. The sea became regulated. Violence was centralized. Disorder gave way to control. The pirate, stripped of myth, stands not as a hero, but as evidence of what happens when survival leaves no legal path. With piracy largely extinguished as a living practice, what followed was not silence, but transformation. The pirate did not disappear, he was repurposed. The figure that survived into literature and popular imagination bore little resemblance to the historical pirate. Understanding this transformation is essential to understanding why myths endure more strongly than facts. The earliest pirate narratives were written not by pirates, but by their enemies. Court transcripts, sermons, and pamphlets portrayed pirates as monsters, moral degenerates, and enemies of God. These texts were tools of control. They justified harsh punishment and reinforced social order. Pirates were depicted as warnings, not inspirations.
However, these accounts also unintentionally preserved pirate voices. Confessions, testimonies, and last speeches recorded under duress provide rare glimpses into pirate psychology. These sources reveal fear, exhaustion, and pragmatism rather than bravado. Yet even here, editing and coercion shaped what survived. As piracy faded, hostility softened. Distance made reinterpretation possible. By the late 18th and 19th centuries, pirates became convenient symbols of rebellion. Writers stripped away economic context and replaced it with individualism. Structural violence vanished from the narrative. Personal choice took center stage. This shift coincided with industrialization. As factory labor replaced maritime labor, the sea became a space of imagination rather than survival. Pirates no longer threatened trade or order. They could be safely romanticized. Their lawlessness became aesthetic rather than dangerous. Literature played a central role. Fictional pirates embodied traits denied to ordinary people: autonomy, mobility, and defiance. These characters were not meant to be realistic. They were responses to rigid social structures. The pirate became a fantasy of escape. This transformation required erasure. Disease, starvation, racial exploitation, and internal violence were removed. Pirate democracy was exaggerated. Gender violence disappeared. Slavery, which pirates frequently participated in, was conveniently forgotten. The pirate was sanitized. Visual culture reinforced this process. Illustrations emphasized costume and spectacle. Weapons became accessories. Ships became stages. The body of the pirate was no longer broken or diseased, but athletic and expressive. Suffering vanished.
Cinema later amplified these distortions. Films replaced scarcity with abundance and fear with humor.
Pirates became charming rogues. Death lost permanence. Violence became choreography. Consequences disappeared. These representations persist because they serve emotional needs. The pirate offers rebellion without responsibility, danger without pain, freedom without cost. He exists outside society, yet remains understandable. He is lawless but moral, violent but kind. This contradiction is appealing. The historical pirate, by contrast, is uncomfortable. He forces confrontation with exploitation, inequality, and the limits of agency. He reveals how systems produce violence and then punish it. He cannot be easily admired without acknowledging suffering. Modern fascination with pirates often ignores this tension. Pirate symbols are used in fashion, marketing, and entertainment, detached from history. The skull and crossbones becomes playful. Meaning dissolves. Academic efforts to correct this image face resistance. Myth is more attractive than analysis. Complexity disrupts fantasy. Yet the historical record remains clear. Pirates were not revolutionaries. They lacked ideology, cohesion, and sustainability. Their resistance was situational, not structural. That does not make their lives insignificant. On the contrary, piracy reveals the margins of early modern society. It exposes how labor, violence, and power interacted at sea. It shows what happens when legal systems offer no protection. Piracy was not rebellion. It was survival turned criminal. The myth of the pirate also obscures victims. Merchant sailors, coastal communities, enslaved people, and families suffered from pirate violence. Romantic narratives center the pirate and erase those harmed. This imbalance distorts ethical understanding. Remembering piracy accurately requires holding contradiction. Pirates were victims and perpetrators. They resisted exploitation while reproducing it. They sought autonomy while enforcing coercion. They rejected authority while wielding it violently. This complexity resists simple storytelling. It demands uncomfortable reflection. That is precisely why it is often avoided. In the end, the pirate myth tells us more about those who consume it than those who lived it. Each era reshapes pirates according to its desires. What remains constant is distance from reality. The real pirate lived briefly, violently, and uncertainly. He did not sail toward freedom. He drifted between systems that offered no mercy. His life was not a statement, it was a reaction. To remember piracy honestly is not to destroy imagination, but to ground it. Fantasy loses nothing by acknowledging truth. On the contrary, it gains depth. The sea was not a playground, it was a workplace. Piracy was not adventure, it was labor stripped of legality and protection. Its legacy is not romance, but warning. Only by understanding this can the final illusion be abandoned. The final understanding of pirate life emerges not from legends or isolated anecdotes, but from patterns. When viewed collectively,
pirate lives form a coherent narrative of cause and consequence. Piracy was not an aberration in history. It was an outcome. It arose where exploitation met opportunity, where law protected profit rather than people, and where survival demanded violence. The sea in the early modern world was not empty space. It was an extension of empire, regulated by force and commerce. Ships were factories, captains were overseers, and sailors were disposable labor. Piracy disrupted this system temporarily, but it never escaped it. Pirates remained bound to the same economic logic. They stole commodities, not to dismantle trade, but to insert themselves into it. This dependency shaped everything. Pirates could not exist without merchant shipping. They needed trade routes, goods, and markets. Their apparent opposition to empire was parasitic, not transformative. When empires adapted, piracy collapsed. The personal cost of this reality was immense. Pirates sacrificed stability, health, and longevity for marginal autonomy. They escaped one form of domination only to enter another harsher one, governed by chance and violence. Choice existed, but it was constrained. Freedom was partial and temporary. Historical evidence shows that many pirates understood this. Confessions and testimonies reveal little illusion. Pirates spoke of necessity, not destiny. Few described piracy as a calling. Most framed it as something that happened to them after options ran out. This framing does not absolve violence, but it explains it. The end of piracy did not bring justice to those who became pirates. It brought order. Sailors continued to suffer exploitation, now under more regulated systems. Naval discipline remained brutal. Wages remained low. The difference was control. Violence was centralized and legitimized.
Piracy disappeared because it was inefficient, not because conditions improved. This distinction matters. It reminds us that historical progress often prioritizes stability over fairness. The disappearance of pirates did not mean the disappearance of injustice. The myth of the pirate, however, offers emotional resolution. It transforms loss into adventure and desperation into courage. It allows audiences to engage with danger without responsibility. This myth is not harmless, but it is understandable. People seek stories where rebellion feels possible. Yet romanticizing piracy obscures the real lesson. Piracy shows what happens when systems fail to provide dignity. It demonstrates how marginalized laborers can become threats when pushed beyond endurance. It reveals the thin line between legality and criminality. This lesson remains relevant. Modern piracy, smuggling, and organized crime emerge from similar conditions: inequality, weak protections, and economic exclusion. The forms change, but the logic persists. Understanding historical piracy helps demystify contemporary narratives. The pirate, stripped of costume and myth, stands as a human figure shaped by pressure. He is not admirable, but he is comprehensible. He is not free, but he is reactive. He does not represent an ideal future, but a warning about broken systems. History does not need pirates to be heroes, it needs them to be accurate. When we remember pirates honestly, we recover silenced experiences, hunger instead of feasts, fear instead of swagger, disease instead of immortality. We see bodies worn down by salt and sun, minds strained by constant threat, lives ended without meaning or reward. This honesty does not diminish the past, it respects it. The life of a pirate was short, unstable, and violent. It offered moments of agency amid overwhelming constraint. It attracted those with little to lose and consumed them quickly. It did not challenge the world, it reflected its cruelty. In the end, piracy was not a dream of freedom sailing under black flags. It was the shadow cast by empire across the sea. And when the light shifted, the shadow disappeared.